All right, tonight, author of the book The Paranormal Detective, Greg Lawson, joins me on the show to talk about his views on the paranormal and ways in which paranormal investigators can hone their skills. We will also talk about his take on the 1947 Roswell incident, as documented in his book Roswell, the After Action Report, on this episode of Passion for the Paranormal. Well, greetings, fellow truth seekers, and welcome once again to Passion for the Paranormal, bringing a passion for the paranormal to you. I'm your host, Curry Stegan, and as always, it's really good to be back here with you once again. And in my new book, Walking in the Shadows of Strangers, I document my journey from a curious skeptic to a believer in the paranormal, and I cover my personal experiences at over 20 different haunted locations. Some of these are even a bit creepy and unsettling. If you'd like to pre-order the Kindle version at a discounted price, you can find a link on my website at passion4theparanormal.com, or you can simply visit amazon.com and type in my name. If you'd like to order the paperback version, it'll be available for purchase on Amazon on 15 March. All right, I'm really excited and eager to get into my discussion with Greg Lawson. Greg is eeks of credibility. He's got over 10 years experience as a military veteran and over 30 years experience in law enforcement, many of the years he spent in law enforcement as an investigator. He's got a book out called How to Be a Paranormal Detective, and so he's got a lot of tips and things that he talks about ways people can become better paranormal investigators. So really eager to get into the discussion with Greg. If you know of a friend, family member, or coworker you think that would like to tune into the show, please simply share a link with them and let them know about it. And just make sure you're hitting that subscribe button as well. And all right, as I said, I'm eager to get into discussion with Greg. I think this is going to be a phenomenal interview, and I really hope you're going to enjoy tonight's show. And thank you so much for tuning in. Okay, so tonight is Greg Lawson, and Greg is a 10-year military veteran and has traveled to over 40 countries, visiting some of the Earth's strangest sites and conducting his own investigations of their paranormal histories. He is also a 30-year law enforcement officer and a former expert witness for investigative procedures. Greg researches and investigates human paranormal experience and locations known for spiritual or strange activity. Greg is the author of several books to include How to Be a Paranormal Detective. He uses thousands of hours of training he has received through his profession and his experience as a detective, and with his master's degree in education to study human paranormal experience and physical anomalies. Greg, thank you so much for joining me on the show.
My pleasure, man. Thanks for asking me.
Yeah, it's good to have you, and it's great to hear that people like you are out there applying some rigor to the paranormal, and using some of these investigative procedures out there. I'm a paranormal investigator. I think that title's used pretty loosely amongst the paranormal community. And I think a lot of us really, if we really want to be honest, maybe you're more like paranormal hobbyists or enthusiasts, but the term paranormal investigator sounds important. And I've been doing this for a number of years. I'm guessing I probably wouldn't even come close to meeting your rigorous standards for investigation, but I have a lot of fun with it, and I've had many, many interesting experiences. So maybe you can take us back, Greg, and talk about how this crazy journey started for you and how you kind of folded law enforcement background and investigation into the paranormal world.
Yeah, that's a very loaded and long story there, but I will condense it. When I was 5, my brother was almost 10 years older than me, and 11 years older than me, and he would take me out on his motorcycle in Central Texas. No helmets. He had a Triumph 650 Bonneville motorcycle. He was 17 at the time, and we would go out and he would take me riding around, and basically back then it's urban exploration or rural exploration. We'd look for old abandoned houses and then go and see what's going on in the old abandoned houses, and we would go to graveyards and just strange places. So he started doing that with me when I was 5 or 6. And then when I got into elementary school, I would then get my friends that I met. Hey, let's go look at the graveyard. Hey, let's go look over here. And so did a lot of exploration, I guess, that way all the way through high school. And when I went into the Army right out of high school, I was with the Rapid Deployment Unit out of Fort Bragg. And so I got to travel to a lot of different places. I spent 2 winters up in Alaska. I got to go all over Alaska. I was in Central America, in Honduras and Guatemala and El Salvador, and then I was stationed over in the Sinai Desert in Egypt, North Africa. I went to Sudan, so I got to go to a lot of different places. And wherever I would go, I would typically, back then you actually had to go to the library. There's these things called books that people used to read. I don't know if you've seen those or not, but yeah, I'd go to the library and do my actual research, since we didn't have the internet and all the answers right at your fingertips. And so I would go do that. And I'd try to figure out, well, I'm going to Egypt. What kind of weird stuff is in Egypt, kind of thing. And I'd do a little bit of research, and I'd try to go to those places. And I just kind of did that as a hobbyist, like you said. But then when I got out of the Army, I'd go to work for the sheriff's office. And I'm a deputy. I'm working the street. Then I go to I get reassigned as a mental health officer, which in Texas we have designated cops that take care of people that are experiencing mental crisis, right? And don't wear uniforms, and you go and answer the call. It could be a family violence call, and the cop there goes, "Oh, this person is having some issues," and then we go there, whatever it might be. Could be the naked woman dancing on top of the mailbox. You never knew what your call was going to be. But during that time, I learned a ton of mental health jargon, and it was an applied science, as far as I was just indoctrinated in all of this stuff, knowing very little about mental illness, and then having to go through the schools and do all that stuff, get the certifications. And at that point, I was like, man, I interviewed, I don't know how many people that have been abducted by aliens, people that were possessed, a lot of conspiracy theory, robots infiltrating people's bloodstreams. I mean, just all kinds of stuff. And the crazy part about it is today, a lot of it's true, like robots in your bloodstream and things like that. There are things that they're working on now that is very similar to what people were experiencing in the 80s, and it just kind of makes you wonder, were they just dreaming this stuff up, or was something else going on? So did that. Then I went into the Navy. I was an operations specialist in the Navy. That's for those of you who don't know, that's one of the only jobs in the Navy where you're not a technician. Most jobs in the Navy, you fix something. Operations specialists don't fix anything. They break stuff. They use a lot of different electronic countermeasures and electronic means to gather information, do an analysis on it, and then disseminate that information to whoever has a need to know on that. And so that was a great thing, because I got to experience a lot of very unusual things, as far as through air detection and tracking, behaviors of certain aircraft, behaviors of certain anomalous contacts that we would come across that wouldn't be considered a naturally occurring event. Wasn't a weather phenomena. It wasn't, geese. It wasn't, some sort of natural thing. There's other things. So that spurred my interest even that much more. I get out and go back to work in law enforcement, and I realized, wow, there's these TV shows and stuff that's going on. So I watched a couple of those, and I was like, well, I'm not watching those anymore. It's not entertaining to me. But it was a thing. And so I'd written a couple of books by then, and I wrote a book called Zombie Advocacy. And it was a satirical book about how if there was a zombie outbreak, This is like it's a manual on zombie advocacy, right? And if there was an actual zombie outbreak, what would the attorneys do? They would advocate for the zombies, and they would get them rights, and they would, all the weird stuff that attorneys would do for an undead person that's still a U.S. citizen, right? And that pulled me into the paranormal realm of going and doing these events. So I've done events in Transylvania, all over Europe, France, England, all over the place, and a lot here in the United States. So that kind of brought me into that. And then I ended up writing How to Be a Paranormal Detective, which is like the next step above, paranormal investigation 101, where you get to, your K2 meter is explained to you. This is much, much higher level of understanding through psychology and industry standard practices of conducting investigations, cross-examination, that sort of stuff. So yeah, that's what I do. And now I kind of help different groups. I help some of the shows. I counsel with some of the shows now, and have a really good time. Have a really good time.
Yeah, that's great. And it sounds like you kind of get to do something you enjoy doing now.
Yeah.
Which is always a good thing. Did you have any now, Greg? Going back? Would you say? I know we all, when we're younger, we seem to want to have these thrills of going into cemeteries and stuff. And I even did it when I was a young kid. But any strange experiences, unexplained experiences you had that you could say maybe were paranormal?
So I would go along the metaphysical line. I have not seen a full-bodied apparition. I haven't been abducted, possessed. The people that I worked with when I was in mental health, taking people to the state hospital and to the different private hospitals and doing interventions and stuff like that. I saw people that others would claim are possessed. And their behavior is obviously very different. But I can also tell the difference between someone who is having a mental crisis and believing that they're possessed, and someone who's actually having let's say, an epileptic seizure. Very, very different. And when you see somebody have a very violent epileptic seizure, you could go, I mean, if you didn't know anything about medical, obviously demons are doing that. That's just, when somebody's really having a full-blown grand mal seizure, it would be an easy go to religion and go, wow, look at that. But My stuff is much more along the spiritual line. I was raised Catholic. I'm a recovering Catholic now. Thank you very much. Thank you. And for summer camp, I would go to seminary in Houston, and it was fantastic. I had such great memories of junior high, early high school, going to seminary in Houston. And so I've had those religious experiences and I've had those spiritual experiences. And I've been witness to some electronic evidence that is just miraculous as far as the odds go. I'm kind of a numbers guy. And so when I start looking at something and go, okay, I do the investigation. What is the natural means that could have caused this? And I rule that out. If it gets ruled out, then I'll look and see what's missing. What did I miss here that could be causing this? And then whatever those holes are, it's like, all right, well, that's where the paranormal fits in. Because, I mean, truthfully, if you're using normal means like a K2 meter to try to find paranormal, that really doesn't go together. And we can have that discussion all day long as far as, is a ghost, are they emanating EMF, or is a ghost actually disturbing the EMF that's normally happening around here, or is it rechanneling it? Or, we can just keep going down that road of what if, and what is causing your K2 meter to go from 0 to, peaked out. And we really don't know. I mean, I know it's EMF, but I don't know whether it's because it's emanating from, it's being transmitted from someplace, it's emanating from someplace, or it's being disturbed by something. So I've seen some things. There's a good example. My best example is actually I was with Dave Schrader at this one. We went to Lep Castle in Ireland. And we got there, and for those that don't know, there's a lot of the castles in Europe that are managed under a government program that the owners of the castle get a tax break if they allow regular people just to come in and look around and do tours, right? So they get this big tax break, and they can help fix the castle and maintain the castle. So Lep Castle is like that. Sean and Ann are the owners there. And you just basically just stop, get out of your car, walk up to the castle, knock on the door. They'll come to the door and say, hey, we have a group here. We'd like to come look through. He'll go, okay, hold on a second. Let me clean up a little bit. Close the door, gets his stuff ready, and then he lets you in. And, there is like, you can look anywhere you want to in the house. Just please don't go into the master bedroom. And it's marked. And so you have the whole run of the castle, right? There's about 11 to 13, depending on where you get your information, stories of entities at the castle, whether they're ghosts or whether they're like elementals. There's an elemental there that they say that's very disturbing. And so one of the ghosts is the priest in the Bloody Chapel. The Bloody Chapel's at the top of the keep of the castle itself. And one of the priests was murdered by his brother there on the altar. Oddly enough, it's a chapel, right? I mean, it's maybe the size of a 3-car garage, something like that. And it's made for God, right? It's a church. In the floor, there's an oubliette, a dungeon. When they did a renovation of this place, they actually pulled out like 30 bodies out of this dungeon that they would have either killed or just grabbed and thrown in this hole. And they fall. This is the Blade Chapel's like on the 3rd or 4th, what would be like the 4th floor. They would fall all the way down in the interior wall and land on spikes at the bottom. And oubliette is a French word that means to forget. So you just throw them in there and just leave them. They can scream and yell until they died, and then they just stay there. So anyway, this place is pretty twisted up, man. So So we got there and I put up a bunch of equipment. I personally I use like an EMF detector to determine whether or not there's ambient electricity in the room. I'm not looking for ghosts using that thing. I use it as it's kind of designed, which is to pick up, ballast off of fluorescent lights and things like that. So I'll eliminate places where I don't put equipment there that may disturb it and cause some degaussing stuff on my cameras. So I use a digital and an analog camera, and then I use a digital and analog recorders, and that's pretty much it. And I just kind of set it up and do whatever we're going to do in there. And so we were up in the Blake Chapel for, I don't know, a few hours. And people are coming in and out, and we're just kind of visiting and looking around and hanging out, right? And I'm looking for this priest. So I could have been looking for a lot of things. I could have been looking for any of the 11 to 13 ghosts / elemental added in there. I could have been looking for whatever, right? Did you pick anything? I could have been looking for that, but I was looking for a priest. And when we were done, I kind of hung out in one of the hallways. There's a woman in red that is seen in there. She has a very disturbing history. She was kidnapped by the O'Bannon family, was used as a sex slave, basically, was pregnant, had the baby, and they just took the baby and smashed it. And she ended up killing herself. And so she is known to be seen in the hallway, and supposed to be a very, very scary type specter. And so anyway, didn't see anything, went back down, talked to Sean and Ann for a while, and then we left. On the way out, a couple of people took pictures in the yard, took pictures of Sean and Ann standing by the front door as we're staying away back from the yard. You can see the front of the castle, and we leave. A couple of weeks later, one of the ladies that took the picture contacted me and said, "Oh my God, look at this picture." And she sends it to me. There's a priest standing in the second story window. Ann and Sean would not have put it. They don't trick people. That's not what they do. They're historians. They're not really into the ghost thing. I think they believe that there might be spirits there, but they're friendly spirits and they don't have a problem with them. But then I do the math on that. Okay, of the amount of time that we were there, where we were standing, could it be a reflection on the window? Could it be this? Could it be that? And to be quite honest, that the image of that priest in that window, he would have been a giant. He would have been 10 feet tall, big. His head was much bigger than what you would normally be in that window. Is that pareidolia? Is that my brain looking and trying to somehow create this imagery and make sense out of, the clouds or whatever, and I see Snoopy in the clouds? Well, maybe I was looking for this priest, and I saw the priest in the window based on my preconceptions. But if anybody looks at this picture and they go, "Wow, what in the world is that?" So that was one of the most powerful, convincing pieces of evidence that I've ever been a part of, loosely been a part of. And that is why I keep spending money, writing books, traveling, and doing these investigations is, one, I get to eat really cool food someplace. Two, stay in a strange place that's neat. Three, investigate legends. Four, go to the place, experience what it was like. And five, maybe come away with something crazy like that. So.
Yeah, it's I kind of liken it to golf or fishing. You hit that one great shot, you catch that one big fish.
Okay.
And even if you get skunked for a while, you always remember that one big fish you caught, right? But just to kind of echo what you talked about, Greg, as far as using EMF, when I go into locations, I use EMF really for the same purpose. I'm trying to find areas where there may be high EMF disturbances. Maybe this is an area that's causing hallucination for people. And I'll give you an example. We were investigating an old private school here in the area I live in northern Utah. And a lot of people in this hallway going out to the basketball court were reporting getting strange feelings, feeling like somebody's watching them. You know, people were having strange experiences. And it turns out that there just happened to be this huge electrical junction box sitting right there in that hallway, was giving off very, very high EMF. And that kind of led us to believe that perhaps that was causing maybe people to have some hallucination or get uneasy feeling. EMF, high EMF is reported to cause kind of a hallucinatory effect on people. So
Right.
we kind of ruled that area out and said, well, I think we can kind of debunk that based on the fact that there's this gigantic electrical junction box sitting right there. And it was obviously giving off high EMF. So, yeah, I think you can use it as a tool to kind of rule out certain areas where you don't really want to focus because perhaps they are going to cause some sort of interference with your equipment, you know, whatever the case is. So I'm glad you mentioned that. 95% of any what I would consider paranormal evidence I've captured has been in the form of audio, EVP, as we like to call it. And so that I always like it, a trusted, you know, a few trusted digital voice recorders. I noticed you said you use analog and digital. What is the reason for using analog and video? Analog and digital.
Right. So digital is going to give you a lot more artifacts. And so the artifacts are going to be disruptions in your what would normally be a wave flow of analog sound. Digital is electronic, and it's, if you want to make it simplistic, it's made of blocks. So your waveform, instead of being a nice smooth waveform through magnetism, you're using a computer type generated rhythm that's going to be made of ones and zeros, and those ones and zeros can't be curvy, they're boxy. And so depending on how good your recorder is. Now there's some recorders out there that are very popular. It's the P60. Is that what? I always forget what that is. It's a Panasonic recorder that probably sold for, I don't know, $35-40 in the 90s, are selling for $2,500 $3,000 now on eBay.
Yeah, I think it's like the DR60 or something. I don't use it. I'm not a fan of it. But yeah, I know what you're talking about, and you see it in a lot of the paranormal shows. You see a lot of the paranormal shows where they use it.
And you could say that it is the one that has the most disruptive artifacts that it picks up, and then other people will say it's the most accurate one to pick up EVP. So, you know, it depends on what school of thought you're coming from on whether this is a good thing or a bad thing. So I use both. And I have three. I have two digital and an old analog. The old analog very rarely picks up anything. The digital ones pick up stuff all the time. My cheap digital one that I just got from just like on Amazon, it's got a dual mic on it. It is a nice, really clean digital recorder. Very few artifacts. Very rare for me to pick up any kind of EVP on it. But some of the older digital recorders definitely pick up a lot of EVP, or what we would determine as EVP.
Now, could it also be a function of the frequency range that these recorders are operating in? I know some have much wider frequency band, if you will, than others. You know, some go down into the low hertz, up into the higher gigahertz range. Could it be that some of these analog ones are just not as sensitive, or I don't know. I've never worked with, I don't think, any analog voice recorders.
Yeah, all of that would matter. And you look at the old school musicians are driven crazy by digital recordings, right? I rarely can tell the difference. I can if it's like a bass line. I can tell the difference between a digital bass line and analog bass line. But like a regular guitar, drums, stuff like that, I can't tell the difference. But you have these older guys in their 60s and 70s that, grew up in using metal tape for their recording. All their stuff was analog. They absolutely can tell the difference. Their ears are trained to that. I equate that as I did firearms instruction for a long time for the military and for law enforcement. I see bullets. I can see bullets. And you're out there long enough, your body adapts to certain things that matter to you, and bullets matter. And so when bullets are fired, I can watch the bullet. I'm not Superman or anything like that, but I absolutely see them. I think that equates it a lot to those folks that are professional audio engineers that can just pick up stuff that most of us would not know one way or another. We wouldn't even hear it probably, but they do. And I talked to a lot of people about that too, as far as mediumship and psychic stuff and clairvoyant and being a sensitive and all that. From us being children, our parents, for the most part, in America, indoctrinated us into there's no such thing as ghosts, there's no such thing as monsters. Don't pay attention to all this stuff, and it kind of wipes our slate clean, and we learn not to pay attention to a lot of the intuition and gut instinct and sensitive stuff that we would normally pick up if we would encourage a child to pay attention to what they are seeing. But it could be terrifying for a child too. There's a monster in the closet. Well, do you want to tell them? Maybe there is. I don't know. Can you see it? What does it look like? Or do you want to say, there's no monster, it's fine, you're going to be okay? So I think a lot of that has to do with classical conditioning on what we get really good at and what we don't.
Yeah, and I've had some psychics and mediums on the show, and there is a common trend is a lot of them at a young age tend to repress and kind of let go of some of that ability, if you will, just because of the backlash, the ridicule, and they didn't really want to deal with that. So you find a lot of that with psychics and mediums. That seems to be kind of a common theme with a lot of them I've talked about. And maybe as they get further on into life, they kind of bring it back in and, go back to opening up without those abilities. I'm curious, Greg, because I know, and I don't want to get to the UFO subject yet, other than I know you've written a book about Roswell. But when we're talking about the paranormal, I find that a lot of people use a very narrow definition. Usually they're thinking of ghosts and hauntings when they talk about the paranormal. The actual textbook definition is anything beyond the normal scientific understanding of things. So I'm wondering if that's kind of what you've adopted with the paranormal. Are you really delving into all kinds of unexplained things? Or are you primarily focused in ghosts and hauntings and more of that vein?
Yeah, no, I'm a professional investigator. That's what I've done for 32 years, and then another 10 years Army on top of that, or an Army military on top of that. So I look at unusual experiences. So that could be friends that I know that go to New Mexico and go do experiences with peyote and try to contact their forefather spirits and stuff like that, and talk to them about their experience. Everything from that to religious experience to cryptids to aliens, the whole thing. And whatever the subject is, I tell people all the time, if you're a professional investigator, you're a skeptic. And what people get really confused, because I've been talked to very nasty, say, well, you're just a skeptic, you're just a debunker. And I'm like, well, I think you're getting that word confused with cynic. There's a difference. A cynic, when you say I'm a paranormal investigator, a cynic rolls their eyes at you, shows contempt against what your thought process is. A skeptic is, you say I'm a paranormal investigator. The skeptic says, "Oh yeah, well, what do you do? What do you investigate?" Because they're gathering information. So I always look at it as like a continuum. If you drew a line, a cynic is way on one side at the end of that line. Way on the other side is the true believer that is just gullible, just believes anything. You tell them anything, they're like, "Wow, that's crazy," and they just believe it. A skeptic is floating around between those two based on the evidence that this person gets. And so it becomes more of a believer when they see better, well-founded theories and investigative procedures, as opposed to, going over to the cynical side of, you say you were possessed, you fell down on the ground, you're flopping around, and then you're laying there. People want to call 911 for you, and you readjust because you're uncomfortable while you're laying there. I'm like, okay, we have a problem here. This is not what this appears to be, right?
Right.
And so it's about the process, and the process is going to lead you to whatever that foundation is and whatever that conclusion is going to be. And so that's what I specialize in. So I can apply that, whether it's an insurance fraud case, or whether it's a murder case, or whether it's a haunting, whether it's a cold case, abduction, alien abduction kind of thing. It just doesn't matter. It's just the founding principles of a good industry standard practice and investigation. So that's what I specialize in.
Yeah, I like to refer to myself as a curious skeptic, and I maybe those two words don't go together. I don't know. I think you've pretty much touched on really what a skeptic is, and I started as a skeptic in this field.
I would. I'm with you, man. I'm a curious skeptic, because I've had things happen to where and my things are like synchronicities, deja vus. The example of the priest, the mathematical formula that you would have to formulate for me to travel from Austin, Texas to Ireland, looking for a priest, and a priest shows up in a window. It wasn't a nurse in the window. It wasn't a Bigfoot in the window. It was what I had intended to go there to find, and completely, apparently, overlooked it until I left. So
Right. Yeah, and I didn't really have any experiences I could say were truly paranormal. When I was young, a friend and I saw what we thought was a UFO. Maybe that kind of whetted my appetite for just all things strange. I closely followed the UFO subject, but I had a lot of people talk to me about their experiences and, uh, you know, paranormal or seeing a ghost or, having a strange type of paranormal experience. And just you know, the, the collective stories that I had heard over the years just continued to make, my curiosity grow and grow. And then, kind of the shows came out. I want to talk about the shows. Okay. There's a lot of paranormal shows out there. Some are no longer there that were there in the early days, but what's kind of your sense of, the paranormal shows? I know not all of them are equal, but I know you said you don't really watch them, but you have worked on, or collaborated with some of these. What's kind of your sense of what you see on TV right now?
So I don't watch any paranormal shows on TV. When a show comes out, I usually watch a couple of episodes. I watched Dave Schrader's shows. I love the Halser Files. I love that for the simple fact that they reinvestigated stuff that was already done, stuff that was already documented. I found that very interesting, but there wasn't apparently there wasn't enough drama. The very very I mean, Ghost Adventures. They are killing it, right? They're on, I don't know, their 16th season or something like that. I mean, they're just killing it. That's a very unusual niche kind of thing that they're doing. Ghost Hunters strong, then they left, and then they're back. They're redoing a lot of stuff. They're inviting, well, something that I'm really impressed with them is they're inviting more people outside of their group to come in with them and do things. And that was one of the things that I've always found very strange is, there's a thing in business, there's a thing in when you're an employee that my mother didn't tell me. And it's to never outshine your boss. And there's a lot of bosses out there that have they're very concerned about them being unseated from their point of power. And I know that there's a lot of situations where people wouldn't invite other people in because they're afraid that, oh, what if they know some more stuff or they like them more or whatever. So they try to keep it very protected, right?
Right.
But I'm very pleased with a lot of the shows are now kind of crossing those lines and bringing other people in with other thought processes, other ways of investigating, and gives a different perspective because a good friend of mine, I say she was a good friend. I think she would say the same thing. Rosemary Ellen Guiley. She was the Popess of the paranormal. She passed away a couple of years ago. I did a couple of books with her. And she was a fantastic mentor. Incredible amount of knowledge in the paranormal. One time we were talking, I said, well, being an expert in paranormal, I mean, what is an expert in paranormal? I don't think you can be an expert. And boy, did I get an earful on that one. And so my point, I didn't mean to offend Rosemary. I was saying in general, because we don't have a scientific method in order to develop a good hypothesis and then test a theory on a paranormal event, because scientific method is all about repeatability. And it's so rare that any paranormal experience repeats itself. And when it does, people typically don't document it very well. And so we're back at square one where it's all anecdotal, right? And people are just telling stories about how this thing happens all the time. There's a good example in Westlake Hills, Texas, right outside of Austin. There's a story called the Ghost Wagon of Westlake. It's on an old road called Campcraft Road, and some kids back in the 60s were out there in the wintertime. And there's a creek that goes through there, and the cold weather and the warm water created a fog. And they said that they could see this wagon going through there. And it was two horses and a wagon and a guy, an old man and a dog. And it looked like he had a wagon of cotton, which is not unheard of out there. And they said that they routinely saw this. Well, people start looking for it and they can't find it anymore. Then I do an investigation on it, and there's 5 different stories that amalgamated in the 1960s that made the Ghost Wagon of Westlake. It was literally 5 stories that separate stories that over 100-year period became one story. And it was fascinating as far as culturally to look and take a deep dive into that and go, oh, that's 5 separate stories, 4 separate people. And, they got the names wrong on some of them, but yeah, that would make sense, And so it just kind of depends on how you look at the investigation and which way you take the deep dive, or you just go, okay, supposedly there's a woman in white that's seen at this fort. We'll go look around, and you go and you look around for the woman in white. It has a lot to do with your process and what your end game is going to be.
Right. Yeah, and when I talk about, there's obviously so many people involved in the paranormal now. Some, I've never liked the term ghost hunting, and I think it kind of just, kind of ekes of thrill seeking. People going out. Now, don't get me wrong. There is a thrill aspect to doing the paranormal, and we all kind of will remember that strange experience, and sometimes these are personal experiences, that startled us, or there's always a thrill aspect to it. What kind of just some simple practical tips that you have for people out there involved in the paranormal, how they can maybe be up their credibility, up their game, and be better investigators, better paranormal explorers, whatever you want to call them. Just some things you've noticed and things you can maybe suggest.
Sure. When you look at that, I think you pointed out something very interesting is, are you a ghost hunter? Are you a paranormal explorer? Are you a paranormal investigator? Are you a paranormal detective? Are you some sort of parapsychologist? Where are you on, I use the gullible to cynic continuum. Where are you on that continuum? Are you, let's go get some beer and run around in the cemetery? Or just hang out in the cemetery, smoke cigarettes and drink beer? We used to do that. We were respectful to the cemetery, but it was just someplace where nobody would go out. We would hang out there and, hey, did you hear that? Did you see that? Sure. We would do that. And the more, by the way, it helps. Alcohol helps with finding ghosts. Apparently, I'm just saying. From an anecdotal standpoint, it seems like people experience more stuff when they're drunk. But that could be a bad observation on my side. But so you got ghost hunter. She's going to run around, go ghost hunting, right? You're not looking at the legend. You're not looking at the history of the place or anything. You just see someplace and it's creepy and you're going to go over there and go ghost hunting, or urban exploration kind of thing, an old building, and you're going to go in there. Or are you going to be a paranormal explorer? Are you going to travel very far distances and go to places that have legendary experiences like, I don't know, King's Road and Game of Thrones? It's called the, I'll think of it here in a minute. But anyway, in King's Road is actually a real place, and the Dark Hedges. You could go to the Dark Hedges, as a paranormal explorer, just because it's creepy. You're going to go there and take pictures and see. So there's these different levels. In the paranormal investigator, you're like, hey, man, I read about this. I'm going to look online, look at some stuff. I'll call ahead, talk to the guy that owns the place. I say, hey, can we come out and do this? Or let's say you want to go to the Crescent Hotel in Eureka Springs, Arkansas. Fantastic. My favorite place. And you're going to go there and stay the weekend and, take the tour of the body parts, and you're going to hear about the crazy, essentially murders that happen there through medical malpractice. And that's an investigation. Then you step it up to a paranormal detective kind of thing where you're documenting things. You have a case file with your information. You have it separated out into the legend, into the history of the actual, recorded history, as far as how many 911 calls went to that particular location. What was that location before that house was built there? You're checking tax rolls and who owned the original deed. Did it come from a Spanish land grant? Like here in Texas, a lot of stuff comes from Spanish land grants. You look at maps of Texas around mid 1700s, late 1700s. It's all Spanish surnames. There were no Anglo surnames out there. It was all Spanish surnames. So, who owned this place? What happened at these locations prior to that? And then when you go and talk to your um, witnesses or the people that are professionals in that area, that are historians, how do you interview them? What are you just going to go have a talk? Are you going to actually ask some serious questions and then cross-examine those questions and then cross-examine them with someone else and do all that? So it just kind of depends. If you want to up your game in the paranormal field, start building a case file on whatever it is you're looking at. Just get a folder someplace. Find the legend. Copy and paste the legend into a Word document and call it the legend, right? And get multiple legends and cross-examine those and go, okay, I'm going to build what seems to be, a concise and chronological explanation of the legend. You create that. That's your document. Then you go into the historical part of it and you document all of that. Then you go into, if you can get any photographs, you get any of that stuff. Then you build your case on the people that you're going to talk to. Who are the people? I have an example of, there was a UFO situation in about 1942 or 43, at the Trinity site where they were doing a lot of the atomic bomb testing. And there was an incident where this is unusual. It's an avocado shaped craft crashed out there, ran into a radio tower out there, and was half covered in dirt, right? And a couple of little boys saw that. They were on their horses out looking for a cow that had gotten out of wherever he was supposed to be, or her, and they were going and looking for this cow and found this thing. And it's interesting because they describe it as an avocado shaped thing. Well, that's kind of rare, right? That's a cultural thing. If you're going to shape something like you're very familiar with, instead of saying it's an egg shaped, which I'm sure they were very familiar with eggs as well, but it's just one of those unusual things. If you talk to somebody in the 1940s in England, they wouldn't have used the word avocado. They would have probably used egg or something else like that. So you build up this stuff and you go and you look and see if you can find the actual, what I call an alpha report. Who was the first person that reported these things? At Lepp Castle, it would be Mildred Darby. In the late 1800s, early 1900s, her husband bought Lepp Castle and they did a renovation. And when she lived there, she started having these experiences. And she's one of Ireland's first horror writers. And she wrote a lot about the ghosts there at Lepp Castle. They looked at it as fiction at that time, but it was written much more factual than she was just making things up. So you look for that. You try to build that case based on a really, really well-crafted foundation. And if you start there, that's stuff that you can do at home. You don't have to travel to Ireland. You don't have to travel halfway across your state to go do this stuff. This is something that you get home, you have dinner or whatever, and you go over to your computer and you start looking and seeing what you can find. Go to Google Scholar. If you go into Google Scholar and see if you can find some scholarly papers that are written by people trying to get their PhDs or have their PhDs on the particular subject, you'll find amazing stuff. And you can build that foundation and have a much better understanding. Everybody wants to go investigate the Stanley, and everybody wants to go investigate Amityville, and they want to go to Waverly, and they want to go to, these common places. If all of us that are interested in the paranormal lived in our own little town, if we would all just go and find the really cool mystery there and spend 2 years taking a deep dive in it, we would have such amazing information. The problem with that, like for a guy like me, people are always pushing me, publishers and everybody else is always pushing me to do something that's going to sell. Make sure Mothman is in your title. Make sure Bigfoot is in your title. Make sure, some sort of catchy phrase is in your title of people that know about these things. You don't want the Mardi Gras murder. I mean, really, who's really interested in that? Well, it's a fascinating case, and nobody knew about Amityville until some guy went, "Hey, we need to do something with this." So, if we would all just quit chasing that big, very popular, Lizzie Borden house, and concentrated on the little things that happen, I guarantee you, if you look at the history in your town from the mid 1800s to the early 1920s, you will find horrific things that happened in your town, because the only people that talked about it is they would throw a little snippet in the newspaper. Cops didn't write reports on it. There might be some letters written in family archives. But when you start looking into it, they tried to mask over the horrific stuff that was happening. And you take a deep dive in there, and it's pretty amazing. I'm going to shut up now. I've rambled a long time.
No, that's all good information. I appreciate that. No, paranormal group I've worked with, I'm here in Ogden, Utah. We have historic 25th Street. Used to be a big rail hub in the late 1800s and 1900s, and there were so many things going on there. Underground gambling, there was prostitution, and this is Utah. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
there was all kinds of bad stuff going on. I've investigated several locations along 25th Street, and I've got to tell you, it didn't disappoint. There's just been so much going on down there. So yeah, I can understand where you're coming from there. Sometimes your local places have a lot to offer.
Yeah, I just went up to, this is, I'm giving not a good example of what we're talking about, but I flew up to Washington State with a guy named Dustin Gebhart and Bobby Ward, and we went out and spent a week at the site of a train catastrophe from the earlier in the 20th century, and there was a whole lot of people that died in this avalanche at Wellington. It doesn't have to be a murder. It doesn't have to be some nefarious thing. It can be some sort of accident, just a horrific accident. I was talking to some folks about this. And actually, I was on Coast to Coast the other night, and I was talking to Ian Pundit about it. But what about all of these battlefields? There's battlefields everywhere. And are there ghosts there? Or do they require us to go there? I mean, if there's a ghost, is the ghost there all the time? Or does it require us to go there and create some sort of energy there, or thoughts of, we're looking for a ghost, we're looking for soldiers, we're looking for that, for it to actually happen? For us to have an experience, it's all of that paranormal theory is very confusing. But what is the formula? What is this plus this equals haunting? And I think once somebody figures that out, we'll be able to track it a lot more. I know it has to be. It seems to be. It has to be something tragic. It has to be something unexpected, and it has to be something unresolved. But then you'll look at it as like, all right, well, is this an intelligent haunting? Is this a ghost that's there, that knows you're there, and it knows that it's there, and it can interact? Or is it a residual haunting? Is it a time slip? What is this thing that people are experiencing? And I think that's what I meant when I was talking to Rosemary, is it's really hard to define these things. I just know I'm looking for the unusual, trying to figure out what naturally would make it happen. And when I can't figure that out, that's paranormal to me.
Right. Right. You have to kind of, I think we had a saying in the paranormal group, we have to rule out as much of the normal as we can
Yeah.
before we kind of get to the paranormal. So, Greg, I know we're kind of short on time. I've got to get to the Roswell subject. You wrote about it in the book. So the Roswell after action report, you wrote that book. You've obviously delved into Roswell quite extensively. It's some I've looked into for many, many, many years. Can you kind of give us a synopsis of what? I know maybe this is not easy to do, but maybe just kind of a little bit about what you found out, or maybe what interests you the most about delving into the case, and kind of the things that were most startling to you about investigating it.
Okay. So kind of got it into. I was always interested in UFOs. When I was a little kid, when I first started this, when I was 5 or 6 years old, my next door neighbor was an F4 pilot. And at that time, every day when I was out playing, and there were horny toads and lizards and there's snakes, and I'm out in the woods and, having fun, you'd look up and there would be UFOs and they would fly by. Now they were very high, and they were also known as weather balloons at that time. But we didn't know what they were. But I asked my next door neighbor. I was like, I would have been maybe 6. He came home one day. He was a captain, and I was like, "Hey, Captain, what is that?" I pointed up, and he goes, "Oh, that's a weather balloon." We were in the very close to Bergstrom Air Force Base, which was SAC Command at that time. This would have been 1970. And those weather balloons would go up there and get real big. And so I had that interest in what was going on, right? And then my wife's friend moved to Roswell. We went up to visit her, and it just so happened to be during the UFO festival. So when I was there, I was like, I need to talk to some of these folks. So I started talking to Jesse Marcel, started talking to Travis Walton, started talking to Stanton Freeman and Don Schmidt and Tom Carey and all these other people that have been doing these investigations at that point for over 30 years, right? They had been investigating Roswell for a long time. And they have a lot of different theories on it. Some reports of some of those guys have interviewed up to 700 people, and developed different theories and things like that of what happened. And when you're doing an investigation that long, I want you to know I'm standing on the back of great men. They did a great job. But when you're doing something that long, your investigation becomes very cluttered, very mucked up, very more important on, how much as opposed to how well. And I know those guys they would be insulted by me saying that, but I can't take their information to a grand jury and get an indictment. You have to boil that stuff down. So what I did was I stood on the back of these great men, and I took their work and I boiled it down to what I think matters. And I created this book, Roswell After Action Report. After Action Report is a term that the military uses for the report after you either do battle action or training action. You do an after action report reviewing lessons learned. All right, how well did we do this? How well did we not do it? What are we going to do next time to make sure that this flows better?
We call that the debrief in the intel world.
Yeah. And so that's what I did with this is I boiled it down to what I believe mattered, and then concluded it into a form to where if I was going to take it to a grand jury and get an indictment, this is how I would approach it. And what I learned out of that is, and you can't fault people for what they don't know. And you are from your time. So whatever it is that's contemporary, industry standard in your time, let's say 1947, that's okay. When I look at the work that you did in 1947, I would fire you. I would, I wouldn't fire you. I would put you on a developmental action plan. I would sign you up for a bunch of extra training. I would oversee your investigations. I would do a lot of things because you did not do a good job. But the guys that were in charge did a fantastic job of obfuscation. They did an absolute magical job of getting you to turn your head and look someplace else. So everybody would probably agree with this. What happened in the desert, northwest of Roswell, 1947, was something very secret. An object did land out there. It either crashed or it landed, however you want to define that. A whole bunch of people that were in charge said really crazy stuff and didn't get fired for it. And one of them, Colonel Blanchard, who was in charge of this whole thing, when you look at it, it's like a comedy of errors, and like they should have had carnival music going on in the background. Yet, whatever he did there, he got appointed to the Joint Chiefs of Staff, my friend. So whatever he did there afterwards, they really thought he was amazing. So he did something absolutely miraculous while he was there. Whether that was to hide something incredibly secret or to get everybody to look the other way while they shipped the aliens off to, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, I don't know. But what I learned out of the whole thing is that the gentleman that did the original report for the Air Force, the 1994 report that was released in 1995, if they were my, I worked CID, I worked criminal investigations for a long time, been a homicide detective. I've investigated thousands of GAD cases all the way up to homicide. I've supervised investigations. I've taught investigations. These guys that investigated this case did a really poor job with that original report. It's 900 pages long of gibberish that they put in there. Probably about 30 to 40 pages of it matter. And their documentation was absolutely trash. It was, just, I can't even say it was bad. The way that they did their interviews of supposed witnesses was to front load all the questions, tell them what to say, and then get them to make a statement. Their transcripts were edited, and their documentation was just horrible. And so when I look at that, I'm like, all right, well, this is a really bad job. Now I'm going to look at it. Now that was 1994. I'm going to look at it from a 2016, 2018 standpoint of forensic statement analysis and what the FBI and what industry now knows about forensic statement analysis. And I will take all of the stuff that they did and I will apply analysis to that and come out. And my conclusion out of my book, and it's nothing new. There's a whole bunch of people that will roll their eyes and go, well, of course, but that's just your opinion. I've done the work. I proved it. The Air Force is still lying to us. But here's the deal. I don't know what in the world they're lying about. Are they lying about the incident? Are they trying to still mask over intel that is still relevant, still germane to intelligence? Are they trying to mask over the fact that they might have picked people to do the investigation that maybe isn't? Let me back up before I say that, because I don't want to disparage the guy. The guys that did it, I have respect for them. They had a really hard job. They had no idea how serious the American people would take it, or they would have provided a much better product. If you're the general, and maybe you were, maybe as far as a colonel, I don't know how the rank structure works in intelligence or OSI. But if you're there and you're in charge, your job is to assign investigators their cases and to oversee case management. Do you assign your very best, in 1994, do you assign your very best investigator to go out to Roswell, New Mexico, and, investigate a 50-year-old case, 40-year-old case that really doesn't apply to anything? Do you take your best investigator off of that Soviet, or prior Soviet espionage case, and do you put them on the Roswell balloon case? Or do you find the knucklehead in the room that, it's like, I just need to give him a job. Here, go do this. It's hard to say. It depends on what your investigative philosophy is, but they took a guy that's an absolute cynic. Even to today, he wrote a book called Backstory, and even there, he's like, well, we had to make it look like what we were doing was on the up and up, and that's not, I'm not quoting him, but it was essentially what he said, and that no matter how goofy this whole thing was, we had to at least make it look like we were taking it serious. So that was very disingenuous way to go about it. And I've been on deployments like that before, where you're told to go someplace and do something, and you fly there, and you go check into your hotel, and you go straight to the bar, and you eat steak, and you get hammered, and then you get up the next morning and stumble your way through the day, and then go get hammered again. And then, so I don't know what happened during this, but when I read the report, it's like, oh my God, man. So they ended up doing another report in '97. McAndrews did a final report where he brought in more of the high altitude and Excelsior experiments that explain some of the supposed alien bodies that we're seeing, and some other stuff. But my bottom line is, Roswell After Action Report, I don't know what they're lying about, but these guys are horrible at it. When you do forensic statement analysis, and there's a whole bunch of psychology I go into also, as far as overwhelming your witness. To you front load your question. Your witness is 85 years old. You go in and you front load your question on what you found out. Then you tell them, hey, by the way, I'm a colonel. I know what I'm doing. I do this for a living. I put 60, 70 hours a week into this. And my partner has culled through millions of documents to come up with a conclusion we have. So basically, you agree, right? I mean, what's the 85-year-old guy going to do? Like, you know what? I'm really old. I really don't recall a lot of that stuff. You need to, I need to just tell you right now, I don't remember a lot of that stuff. And then the follow-up question is a 95-word follow-up with 5 questions built into it, with a narrative. And I'm like, where did this guy learn his investigative procedures, man? It's horrible. So, anyway, if you want to know about the meat and potatoes of Roswell, what matters, and not get confused by all this other stuff of people that were never involved, yet said they saw a spaceship under a tarp being brought through the town, my book is the book to read.
All right. Appreciate that rundown. And it really is a case with so many different layers and so many different witnesses. The problem is nowadays, and I had Tom Carey, I think is his name, was on my show a while back, that he wrote the book, I believe, with Don Smith, which was kind of the final report. But there's so many layers to the case, and you're right. I mean, who really knows what exactly happened there, other than we know this was a smoking mirrors kind of operation, right? You release a statement, you release a press statement, you retract the press statement. More or less silence. I mean, there was so much to it, but obviously there was something they felt very important, was important enough to cover up and to continue to cover up for all these years. So, yeah, it's
the real kicker. Why are they still lying about this? And they'll say, well, we're not. We gave you the information. No, the way that you explain things, you qualify your statements, and you do it in a way that is deceptive. It's common with serial killers. It's common with common thieves. It's what human beings do when they're being deceptive. And these guys were not very good at it. So the original guys that covered it up were masters at it. But they didn't have all this other technology and information to draw from to prove otherwise, so.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, yeah, thank you for that rundown. I appreciate it. And so maybe, Greg, since we're short on time, if you can share with listeners where they can find your books and more about you. I think you're also known as the Paranormal Detective. What's the websites where they can find your books, all that kind of good stuff, and anything you have coming up.
Yeah, the best thing is you can find me. You can Google me or go on Amazon. Better as far as the books go. You can I have links on my website, which is coldcaselegends.com or theparanormaldetective.com or author Greg Lawson.com. Sorry. And on my website, I have everything that you need to know. You can just kind of go through there and find all that. The stuff that I'll be in Utah in September. Have you heard of Phenomicon up there in Vernal?
I have, and I actually just saw something on that about a week ago. So hoping I can make it out to that one.
Yeah, I spoke there last year, and that's one of the most scientifically based, very interesting paracons that I've ever been to. Really, really good quality, a lot of PhDs speaking, a lot of good researchers speaking, and it was fantastic. So I'll be up there in September, be in Michigan Paracon, like August 24th or something like that, up in Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan, which is absolutely the best Paracon in the nation, I think, in my opinion. It's amazing. It's amazing views, amazing people talking. Everybody anybody that's in the paranormal. Usually, if the speakers there are TED Talk level, very, very, very good. And so I have some others. So we're doing the first Tombstone Wild West Paracon is coming up here in May, first part of May. And they asked me to be a part of that. So I'm really excited about that. Bridget Marquardt from Ghost Magnet will be there. And Ricky Rocket from Poison. He's got a new program called Legend Tripping on YouTube that is really interesting. He's out there in the high desert doing some investigations out there. So that's pretty cool. So, and then I have Waverly Hills with Strange Escapes and Amy Bruni of Kindred Spirits. We're doing that in Louisville. So I'm pretty busy. My calendar's on there though.
Well, yeah, sounds like you have a lot going. All right. Well, hey, great discussion, Greg. I really appreciate you joining me, taking the time, and enjoy what's left of the rest of the night. I know it's kind of getting a little bit later. Appreciate it, and best of luck in all your future work.
My pleasure, man. Thanks a lot for asking me to come on. I enjoyed it.